SABC. Those of you watching us from SABC 2 or DSTV channel 404, thanks so much for choosing us. All right, let's cross over to The Rock then in Pretoria, where Tshepiso Makwetla is standing by. She'll be having more political analysis, and of course, they'll be looking closely at that leaderboard. Tshepiso, good evening.
Good evening, and thank you very much, Flo. As you say, the race for votes, the race for seats continues, and we've got pretty much of a fuller picture, moving towards 70% of those votes that have been counted and verified. But we're focusing now on Gauteng. Obviously, we know that the battle for Gauteng has been very, very fierce. We saw that play itself out in Alexandra earlier on in the past couple of weeks. We spoke about it this week as well. And just looking at the map of Gauteng by votes, what we've seen, this is over 52.58% of the votes completed. And as you see from the map here, the green being the ANC, the yellow being the Democratic Alliance. You'll see a bit of red there by Tshwane, a bit of red here in the Merafong city area. And here you see some purple. I mentioned it earlier on, some surprising statistics coming through. This purple here is a Freedom Front Plus. Professor Somatota Fikeni, Professor Derek Kotze here with me to talk about this. Some say it may be a surprise, some say not. Prof, what do you think? Where do these votes come from? Are they coming from the Democratic Alliance, and if so, why?
There's no doubt that the Freedom Front Plus has taken a chunk from the Democratic Alliance. Reason being some of the issues which have come up recently, and the Democratic Alliance was not forthright in actually defending that particular constituency, particularly of white or Afrikaners, on the issue of land expropriation, on the issue of languages, especially Afrikaans, being removed as the major language in the universities and some schools, the issue of sports transformation in areas such as Rabi, and the street names, the statues. So this particular community might have felt besieged to a point of retreating to a party that was very clear in defending their own interests. The second part might be what I think is the revolving door, as the DA is trying to transform and bring more black leaders. Some of the white, constituencies within the DA might feel alienated, might feel this is an affirmative action of some kind.
So failing to identify with the identity that the Democratic Alliance is pushing forward. Professor Kotze, I know we mentioned earlier on, we're speaking about it, Schweizer Reneke, what happened there. You say that there was a sense that the DA, which would have been seen to be representing largely the white community, and this is obviously a very general statement in Gauteng, did not fight hard enough for this teacher who was accused of that racial incident. It was something that went viral.
Yes, that's indeed so. According to Solidarity's own research institute, that was quite a key moment in terms of association with the DA and the feeling that the DA is not anymore, as my colleague is saying, sort of speaking on behalf of them. So that was, although it appears as if it's one isolated incident, but it seems as if it became almost representative of a sentiment that existed, of that was building up within those communities in relation to the DA for quite some time.
And Professor Kotze, I want us to cast our eye again on this map to just get a sense of the population groups, the demographics, everyday life. We're looking at the West Rand here largely. Here we're looking more towards the East Rand, where we see a lot of the Freedom Front Plus support. Obviously, there's still a lot of empty white patches. That means that this picture could completely turn around. But in these two areas, the east and the western parts of Gauteng, there often have been allegations of vestiges of racism. Is this possibly what could have happened here, that those people felt disaffected? They wanted to slant terug?
I think so. I mean, you mentioned the slogan that the Freedom Front Plus was using for this election. I suspect that these areas are also quite typical of smaller holdings. So it's almost a semi-urban, area where it's almost becoming rural. As well as we know, both of those two areas are former mining areas. So there's, I think, still lots of families who have been in those living in those areas over generations, and they've been involved in the mining, and that is quite a cutthroat type of industry, especially more lately where many of these mines were closed. We can think about, for example, the East Rand, where some of those mines became very notorious of how they were dealing with both black and white miners.
So with the voter turnout so far, Prof, I know some of the projections were of a depressed township voter turnout, and in the past Gauteng was said to have given the DA the level of victory that it had because you had a higher suburban turnout. This year, what is the picture that we're seeing, and do we have a more angrier township vote that we're seeing as protest votes, or people just simply giving their votes to other parties?
Actually, we're seeing higher levels of non-participation or people who didn't turn out to vote. Even for the parties such as the EFF, which at face value seem to have very intense participatory groupings in the stadiums, in the social media, in protests, those young people in the main do not seem to have registered in big numbers or even turned out in big numbers. So we might be facing a bigger crisis of a legitimacy crisis in the system itself, where people might be angry, may feel disaffected, alienated, but they do not have a trust that the political system itself will solve the problem.
And I want to talk about that legitimacy crisis, Professor Kotze. There's arguments now about the credibility of this vote, but who would it hurt the most? Wouldn't the ANC be most hurt by that legitimacy crisis? Because then the opposition parties can come out and say the president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, does not have a mandate from a majority of South Africans to lead, to govern.
Well, that appears to be the case, but I think what's interesting about Gauteng as a province is that the voter turnout is the highest of all the provinces in the country. It's more than 71. So that argument about that the voter turnout, the lower vote, much significantly lower voter turnout nationally, is an indication of a credibility problem or legitimacy problem, I think is a slightly less applicable to Gauteng than to some of the other provinces. But that, I think what is important is also that there's differences of voter turnout within the different parties. And the voter turnout of the DA is normally higher than that of the ANC. At local government level, it's very much pronounced, and I guess we don't have the information yet that it might be a factor in this election.
So what does it mean for the fortunes of the DA, very briefly then?
Well,
especially given the predictions, the CSIR was saying they see either stabilized or a slight loss for the DA. Is that being borne out by the results that we're seeing here? And is it a surprise that the ANC is already at 52.58% with the over 1,457,000 stations and voting completed?
Yes, that is, the logic that normally applies appear to be not applicable to this election. Gauteng is such a boiling pot at this stage about the contestation because it's the province which is most important for the ANC, contributes the most votes, the same for the DA, the same for the EFF, and even the same for the Freedom Front Plus. So it's a highly contested province, and I think because of all these dynamics that we are talking about, it has become, even for the CSIR, very difficult to make a final prediction. But what will be the outcome? It varies between 49 and just over 50%. So it's going to, no one wants to call the final results of this.
Well, I'm going to push you, Prof. Fikeni, because there are a lot of unaccounted votes here, according to these white patches. Do you think, as the ATM, some projections were saying that they already see, just in Soweto alone, a seat for the ATM?
It's possible that some of the smaller parties like the ATM may begin to gain when you are counting the townships, but we should not take that to be something so dramatic. Parties tend to overstate their chances and prospects because they still have this subjective hope that something out of the bag is going to come. The trend is that they may increase, but that increase will not be dramatic.
All right, Prophets, you say some parties punch above their weight, but what is the point of campaigning if people are not projecting themselves, as they keep on saying, as the president's in waiting, as the government in waiting? Well, let's find out now more from the party. Simphiwe Ngongwani on the floor. Simphiwe?